Today on Office Hours, I'm here with Jacob Morgan. And Jacob is a very well-known speaker, and he writes, I think, for everybody. Maybe that's your new business model, to pay to not to not read your columns. No,
exactly.
He writes for Inc. and he writes for Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. And he's got a number of books that are best-selling books, and one of them being the Employee Experience Advantage. And he's an expert on the future of work. Jacob, welcome to Office Hours.
Thanks for having me.
So the first thing I want to ask you about is, tell me about what you mean by experiential organization. What does that mean? That sounds clever.
Yeah, I was trying to think of something clever when I wrote the book. And an experiential organization is essentially one that is amazing at designing great employee experiences. And so there are some things that are comprised in that. So there are three environments that shape employee experiences that I talk about in the book, which are culture, technology, and physical space. And an experiential organization does an amazing job of investing and creating experiences in all three of those areas.
Oh, terrific. So tell me why companies right now are struggling making this work. I know one of the things that I've done is I built my labs, my innovation labs, probably 15 or 20 years ago. These very different kind of labs. And I see these big companies spending hundreds of millions of dollars on these new tech, and nothing happens. Nobody comes. They have almost no success. So tell me why, and tell me what they're missing.
Well, I probably can't speak to the innovation labs, but I know specifically when it comes to themes around employee experience, there are a couple of things. So a lot of organizations, as you know, once they get set in their ways, they're very content and set in their ways. They have issues with setting priorities. They have issues with budget. They have issues with hierarchy. They have issues with internal politics. It's just the nature of working for a large organization. So a lot of times these things just get pushed to the side because, they're too busy. They got other things that they're working on. But I think now we're finally starting to see some of these things being taken a little bit more seriously. At least all the organizations that I speak with are now saying, okay, we're really trying to pay attention to this. And I think the reason for that, there are a couple of reasons for that. The first is that for many decades, companies around the world have been investing in something called employee engagement. Mm-hmm. And this was something that was, a noble cause that was developed. But what engagement has become inside of most companies is this idea of, I call it an adrenaline shot. And basically what happens is an employee starts working at a company. Over time, satisfaction goes down. Then they do an engagement survey, and they say, we need to bump up our scores. And so they introduce some kind of a short-term perk. Free food, hot yoga, bring your dog to work, something. And then the scores temporarily go back up. Then they taper off and go back down, and they introduce another perk. And this is what employee engagement has become inside of most companies. It's these short-term perks to temporarily boost satisfaction. And the investment in employee engagement programs has never been higher, but the scores have never been lower, and sometimes, if you're lucky, they remain relatively flat. So companies are just not seeing the ROI of doing this. And now they're finally taking a step back and saying, hey, wait a minute, we've been doing this for years, and nothing is changing. Yet at the same time, we notice that competition is increasing, new technologies are emerging, business models are being disrupted, new ways of work are emerging. We have a new generation of worker and multiple generations that we need to think of. There's a lot of uncertainty. So we need something so that we can unlock human potential, attract and retain the best people, come up with the best ideas. And if employee engagement and these perks hasn't been working, then what's next? So employee experience is changing the core workplace practices inside of your organization that revolves around your people. And I think that's now being taken, I would like to think, quite seriously.
Well, let me stop you there, because one of the kind of, it's sort of the traditional argument that you see everywhere is sort of boomers against millennials. Boomers, very goal-centric. We're going to the moon. We're going to lick the commies. We built the net. Millennials, save the whales. Taking three, do you hear that? And it's kind of ridiculous.
Lazy, narcissistic.
Right. But what you're really explaining here is something quite different, which is the actual nature of work is changing. Tell us a little bit about how you see work itself changing. And in fact, as you probably well know, we've gone since the recession from 10,000 publicly traded companies to 5. So companies are disintegrating. Companies are becoming private equity. They're basically getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So we're seeing something very, very chaotic. Give us a look in your crystal ball. Tell us what's happening with work.
Well, so first, let me address kind of the millennials and the boomers beating the commies, all that sort of stuff. So, which is interesting because my family is actually from Russia, and so now I live in the Bay Area. So a lot of the research shows that millennials are actually quite similar to every other generation. So there's not so much of a us versus them as, okay, we're pretty much the same, but there's more millennials now and they're vocal. Mm-hmm. So a lot of older workers that I speak with, they always tell me the same thing. For example, I was just talking to the chief learning officer at SAP, and she said, when I was younger and I was in the workforce, our generation wasn't that big. Mm-hmm. And we also cared about a lot of the same things that millennials cared about. But since our generation was smaller at the time, they would just say, shut up, kid, sit down, just stop talking. And today, it's pretty much the same things that are being echoed and voiced. But now there are so many millennials that are asking for that and talking about this that you can't just say, shut up and sit down, like, we don't want to hear from you, because it's everywhere. Right. And so I think that is a key difference. Not just that millennials have these different ideas and we're nuts, but there are so many of them. They're so vocal. They're such a dominant force in the workforce that you are forced to redesign and think differently about your organization, not just for millennials, but for the employee of the future. I mean, this is something we all care about. Flexible work, a sense of purpose, recognition and feedback. These aren't just millennial attributes. These are everybody attributes. So that's kind of looking at that. Going back to your other question, how is the nature of work changing? Right. I think that there's kind of one big thing that I can point to, and there are probably many, but this is kind of the one big mental shift. There used to be a time, and I'm sure you remember this, a lot of people listening and watching this remember this. There used to be a time when an organization had a job, people would line up to apply for that job, right? There would be lines around the corner to fill jobs for manufacturing, to work in assembly plants, to do all these different types of things. And a company would simply say, we have a job, we'll pay you, you do the job. And everybody would say, okay, I want to do it, I want to do it, I want to do it. And there was no employee engagement. There was no yoga and dog and food. I mean, are you crazy? Like, get out of here. That wasn't even a mention. There also used to be a time where you could smoke in the office, where you worked 9 to 5, and everything you did outside of 5 was personal time. And today, you look at it, and it's a very different world, right? You can't smoke in the office. The notion of 9 to 5 is disappearing. And today, when a company says, we have a job, employees don't just raise their hand and say, me, I want it. They kind of say, well, why don't you tell me about this job a little bit? Like, what are the perks? What are the benefits? It used to be in the past where the employee had to convince the organization why that employee belongs there. Mm-hmm. And today, it seems like the balance of power has shifted a little bit. And now the organization needs to convince the employee why they should be there. And that's a very different way to think about work. Because now, like you said, we're seeing companies or people that are raising money on GoFundMe and Kickstarter. They are becoming Uber drivers. They're willing to stay at home and live in their parents' basement longer instead of just taking a job anywhere. So we're not just like lining up to take any job that's available. We are we're thinking about it differently. And that alone is forcing organizations to say, hey, wait a minute. People aren't just lining up to work here anymore. Like, we got to think about something else. It's not just about money. It's not just about how much we're paying them and the seniority. Like, they want other stuff. So that's been one massive shift, right? I think this is balance of power. And I think the second thing also stems from a research project that a psychologist by the name of Thomas Gilovich did a few years ago. Now I interviewed Thomas Gilovich for a podcast that I host. And he did some fascinating research where he found that if you invest and purchase a physical good, over time your satisfaction will decrease. If you invest in an experience, over time your satisfaction increases. So companies now are trying to figure out, how do we make it feel like when somebody starts working here, they've invested in an experience, not just in a physical transaction. And I think we can all agree that tomorrow and next week, next month, next year, a lot of uncertainty, right? Nobody knows what's going to happen. So what's the best way to approach uncertainty? You want to make sure that you have the best people by your side, to the left of you, to the right of you, to the front of you, to the back of you, who are going to approach that uncertainty with you. People that are going to help you come up with the best ideas, identify threats, and basically help you figure out what to do when something new comes your way.
Yeah, there's an old idea. It comes from cognitive psychology called identification and valuation. And it means when you identify that you belong to something and you value it, it has a different currency. Now, I want to put this in perspective of something you just said. One of the things that's interesting to me is, as we're seeing the deconstruction of the corporation, people are competing in federations now. Think about Apple. They really don't make anything these days. They make a closed system, a closed system architecture, et cetera. So what's been very interesting to me is, what is an organization as we move forward? It used to be that there were these large things that had some sort of vertical integration. When I was very young, I got a very great opportunity. I became one of the senior execs that built Domino's Pizza. So it was a wonderful opportunity to take.
And many people around the world thank you for that.
to $4 or $5 billion in 5 years. And one of the things that was interesting was we had built one of these sort of model communities that you're talking about, one of the early ones in the early 80s. And that's how I met Steve Jobs. And the way we did this was we put everything together under one umbrella. It became this kind of utopian community. We built the Frank Lloyd Wright building he had never built. It was all very remarkable. But what I see going on now is these things are no longer physical assets. They're no longer economic relationships. They're cultural. They're identification and valuation relationships. They're people who are like binary stars trading planets as they sort of circulate around each other. So I'm wondering, as we're talking about what is the corporation, where do you see this going? You're part of this emerging generation. Tell me a little bit about these ecosystems, these relationships, these boundaryless organizations, and how that affects what you're talking about.
Well, I was having a conversation with somebody about this the other day as well. And companies today are becoming therapists, financial planners, gyms. So it almost feels like a company is not a company anymore. I mean, if you were to look at a company from like the 80s, the 70s, any time before that, a company was just a place that you went to, you did something, and you got money. And a company is not like that today. I mean, you look at the campuses that are being built. You look at Apple's spaceship campus here in the Bay Area. You look at like Cisco or Airbnb. You walk into these places and you just look around and say, "What the like? This is work. Like, this is an organization. Free and limited organic food. Like, what is going on here?" You do yoga at work. You have financial planners that can assist you. You have car mechanics that come and service your car on site. I think our very notion of an organization is completely changing. And sometimes I struggle with trying to define what it is.
Yep.
But I think it all comes down to this notion that work and life is becoming the same thing.
Yep.
We're seeing less and less separation between work and life. The companies that are being designed look like homes. They look like mansions. They look like these gorgeous places, right, that you wish you could afford, and now you work there.
Yeah, hence the experience again. This is your experiential piece, because
exactly.
It's now combining everything.
Like in the Bay Area, right? You might live in a tiny studio apartment for for half your day, and then half your day you show up to work in this gorgeous mansion where you have organic free food and a gym on site, and so you almost like prefer to go to work. It's like being in an exclusive club. Yeah. Right? You see lifestyles of the rich and famous on TV, but that's kind of like what your organization is now. So it's really, really weird and fascinating to think about and to see. And so I think it all stems down to this notion that work and life and life and work are becoming the same thing.
Well, you talked about part of that boundarylessness. You talked about one of the elements is technology. Part of the boundary. It's interesting. I'm an old artificial intelligence PhD from the old days, So I like to tell my kids, "I built your world. We built your world." But now that note has come due. And now AI is showing up in a way that even I think millennials are very uncomfortable with this. Tell me about AI. Tell me about, AU, augmented reality,
Sure.
the whole 9 yards. Tell me about, because this is kind of now the next thing beyond pervasive connectedness, et cetera. Tell me how that changes the experience.
Well, the AI is a fascinating space. When it comes to experiences specifically and designing great experiences, I think it's good because AI will essentially allow you to create personalized experiences. AI will ideally know everything about every single employee, their preferences, their tastes, the unique things that they care about, and that will allow the organization to shape and design things specifically for you. So that if you care about and want something that somebody else doesn't care about, you won't get that same experience. And so I'll talk more about the AI stuff. But, for example, let's say it's your first day on the job, right? Companies are starting to create experiences around that where, you get a note from your CEO, so people take you out to lunch. Like it's that kind of make you feel good. But it's the same for everybody. So what if AI allowed organizations to customize? The first day on the job for Jacob, the first day on the job for Sally, for Bob, for Jeff. All those first days look different based on what you care about and what you value. Today, we can't do that. So for experiences, I think AI will be a good thing. Now, the uncomfortable part comes into this notion of jobs and what's going to happen with the future of jobs. And it's weird because I speak with a lot of smart people such as yourself, PhDs, people from MIT that are currently leading AI initiatives. I speak with organizations and researchers, and there's still very little consensus around anything related to AI.
That's true.
Half the people say that AI is going to replace a lot of jobs, and there's going to be, we're going to work 10 hours a week, and there's going to be this abundance, and everything will be wonderful. Other people say that there's going to be this doom and gloom, and there's going to be income disparity, and it's like the end of the world. All these people are looking at the same set of information, and so it's very hard to make sense of like what's going to happen.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that when I talk to organizations, so imagine like you're walking and there's a fork in the road, and the left path takes you to AI good, everything will be fine. And the right path takes you to AI, terrible, everyone's going to be out of a job. So you have these two forks in the road. But what few people realize, and organizations that I talk to on the left side or the right side, their plans for the future are identical. So if you ask an organization that says, we're scared of AI, and you say, okay, well, you're scared of it, what are you going to do? And they say, well, we're partnering with universities, we're investing in education and training, we're connecting employees together so that they can teach themselves. You say, okay, great. Then you go to the other organization and you say, you believe the future of AI is going to be good. What are you doing to prepare for the future? They say, we're investing in education and training. We're partnering with universities. It's the exact same thing. So there's a fork in the road, but then like it converges and it's the exact same path forward. And these companies don't realize that. So whether you're scared of AI or whether you are hopeful and you embrace AI, right now, there's very little distinction as far as strategic direction for what these companies are doing. It's basically the same path forward. There's nothing unique about what these companies are proposing. The only unique thing that has ever been talked about is around universal basic income.
Right.
Right? And that's not even an organizational thing.
Policy
That's just kind of
right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
but aside from that, you never hear a company saying, oh, okay, we're fearful of AI. We have this radical idea we want to propose to help make sure that our company stays around. Like, you don't hear that.
Yeah,
it's always the exact same thing.
Great. That's a great insight. So let's save that long turn. What's going to happen there for a minute? Let's play a little closer here. Can you give our viewers 3 things that they can do tomorrow to greatly improve the experience of their workplace? Just 3 things. 3 simple things they can do.
Sure. So first thing, you put people in positions of power who care. So traditionally, we used to take people who make the most amount of money, and we promote them, and we put them in management positions, and we say, hey, now you get to be responsible for other people, just because you brought in the most money.
Yes.
So now I think we need to put people in positions of power who care. We call these people.
Yep.
So take the people, promote them, and teach them how to manage a P&L. Teach them how to delegate. Now, this is a lot where AI comes in, right? So remember that a lot of the decision making that used to be reserved for managers, right? I'm the manager, I can make the best decisions, I have the best insight, the best strategic direction. That's all going to be done by AI, right? I'm now going to have data that does exactly what a traditional manager used to do. So what's going to make a good manager or a good leader in the future is somebody who can work with AI to get that strategic direction and insight, and to get the people to exhibit the desired behaviors to move towards that strategic direction. So the engaging, the empowering, the inspiring, the motivating, the getting people to getting people excited about that. That's what a good manager is going to do, right? And you're not going to do that unless you care. So put people in positions of power who care. The second thing I would recommend is knowing your people, because you can't create and shape experiences for others unless you know them, right? I mean, you have a spouse or a significant other, boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever, right? When you plan date night, like, you know what your significant other likes, what they don't like. And so you know when you're going to plan a date night, like, what's going to be a good date night. The same thing is true inside of your company. If you don't know your employees, how are you supposed to figure out what kind of a space should you build? What kind of food should we offer? What kind of perks and benefits? You don't know. So knowing your people comes in the form of two things. The first is having conversations. And when I say conversations, I don't mean like scripted, hey, all the managers inside of company XYZ, here are 10 questions once a month. Go take out Jeff for coffee and ask him these 10 questions. Like, that's not what we're talking about. These need to be authentic, unscripted, natural, human conversations where you treat your employees like individuals, not just as workers. So know them on a human level, and then know your employees on a technology level. People analytics, data science. You make decisions that make sense for your company because you have data to support it. So should you get rid of annual performance reviews? I don't know. Do you have data? Do employees really hate it inside of your company? Facebook has annual employee performance reviews because they found, after conducting data and research, that the employees there actually prefer that, but they wanted some tweaks and improvements to it. So don't copy Google, don't copy Amazon or Netflix. Make decisions based on data that you have because you know your people. And the last piece of advice I'll say is think of your company like a laboratory and less like a factory. Factories are what we built. They're process-centric, they're status quo, they are all about repeatable steps. And laboratories embrace failure, they encourage innovation, they test, they innovate, they encourage. They're very different ways to think about work. So think about your organization much more like a laboratory and less like a factory. And those are the 3 pieces of advice I would start with.
Excellent. Now, Jacob, tell us where we can learn more about your work and learn more about where you're speaking and all that kind of stuff, so we can follow you and see you and read your next book, your upcoming book, etc. How do we find out more?
Yeah, so hopefully the next book will be in maybe 2019. But I'm pretty easy to find, so you can just Google Jacob Morgan. That'll take you to my website, which is thefutureorganization.com. And my email is jacob@thefutureorganization.com. Books are on Amazon, and then the speaking, the podcasts, the course that I have on employee experience, all that stuff is found on my website.
Wonderful. Jacob, thank you so much for being on Office Hours. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.